You people always think you can blend in. The words cut clean through the ballroom, sharper than the crystal chandeliers overhead. Conversation stalled. A violinist faltered mid-note. Champagne glasses hovered inches from painted lips. Tasha stood near the service corridor in her pressed navy uniform. Her toddler's small hand twisted tightly into the fabric at her hip. Across from her, Richard Collier held up a diamond bracelet between two fingers, like evidence, in a courtroom. "This was on your cart," he announced, loud enough for every donor within 50 feet to hear. "Security will handle it." Heat crept up her neck, but her voice stayed level. "You should check the cameras." "We don't need cameras," he replied. A murmur rippled through the crowd. No one stepped forward. Her toddler looked up at her, confused. "Mommy?" Collier straightened his cufflinks. "You're fired." Immediately. Silverware clinked against china. That was the only sound as security moved in and escorted her toward the lobby doors. 3 hours earlier, the Blackwood Hotel shimmered with the kind of polish money can't quite buy but always tries to imitate. The annual Children's Equity Gala filled the grand ballroom with donors, city officials, and board members who spoke warmly about opportunity. Beneath ceilings trimmed in gold leaf, Blackwood wasn't just a hotel chain. It was a brand built on discretion and legacy. Its founder, Marcus Hale, had turned a single property into an empire, then quietly retreated from public life. He rarely attended events. Few executives had ever sat in a room with him. Tasha worked the night shift. She liked the quiet hours, fresh linens, empty hallways, the hum of vacuums instead of conversation. She had a community college degree in business administration that never quite translated into stability. Life had narrowed into rent notices and daycare invoices. That evening, childcare fell through. So her 3-year-old, neatly dressed and serious-eyed, sat in a service chair near her cart with a coloring book. His name was Caleb Hale. She never used the name for leverage, never mentioned who his father was. In the ballroom, she was simply staff, efficient, invisible, until someone decided she wasn't. And that's when the room began to change. Richard Collier didn't just accuse her. He staged it. He stepped closer, arm extended, finger rigid, as if he were identifying a suspect in a lineup. "We conduct background checks on all employees," he said, projecting his voice toward the nearest cluster of donors, thorough ones. His eyes skimmed over her uniform, her name badge, the toddler at her side. "And yet somehow you managed to wander into a restricted area tonight." "I clean that corridor every Thursday," Tasha replied quietly. He gave a thin smile. "Convenient." A junior manager near the bar suddenly found intense interest in the floor pattern beneath his shoes. A server beside him gripped her silver tray so tightly the glasses trembled against one another, tiny chimes of tension. No one intervened. Not a single board member stepped forward. Security hovered at the edge of the crowd, staring just past her shoulder, careful not to meet her eyes. Tasha felt her son's fingers tighten in her pocket. She kept her shoulders square. "You should check the cameras," she said again. Collier adjusted his cufflinks. "We don't need cameras." The decision was already made. He nodded once towards security, and they began guiding her through the ballroom doors, into the open glare of the lobby. The lobby felt longer than it ever had. Marble floors carried every step, every whisper. Conversations dipped as they passed. A woman in a silver gown leaned toward her husband, murmuring behind manicured fingers. Near the revolving doors, a phone lifted, camera lens steady and unapologetic. Security didn't grip Tusha, but they didn't walk beside her either. They walked slightly behind as if proximity alone might stain them. At the front desk, a supervisor avoided her eyes while unclipping her name badge. The small metal pin tugged against the fabric before giving way. "Your final paycheck will be pending investigation," he said, voice low, procedural. Caleb looked up at her, confusion clouding his face. "Mommy, are we in trouble?" She crouched, smoothing his jacket with steady hands. "No," she said softly, "we're not." The revolving doors exhaled them into the night. Cold air wrapped around her bare arms. Traffic hummed down the avenue. Indifferent, Caleb tugged her sleeve. "Can I call Daddy?" She hesitated, just a second. Then she unlocked her phone and placed it in his small hands. He scrolled carefully and pressed the contact labeled simply, "Dad." Miles away, a quiet office phone began to ring. The office overlooking the river was nearly dark, save for a desk lamp casting a narrow pool of light across a stack of reports. Marcus Hale rarely answered his private line himself. Tonight, he did. "Hey, champ," he said gently, on the other end, small breaths. Then, "They made mommy cry." The words settled into the room like weight. Marcus didn't respond right away. He closed the folder in front of him and leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the city lights beyond the glass. "Which property?" he asked. Tasha took the phone, her voice steady but thin from the cold. "Blackwood, Manhattan." The gala, another pause. No raised voice, no sharp inhale. Just the faint sound of a pen being set down with care. "I understand," he said. He ended the call and pressed the intercom button on his desk. His assistant answered on the first ring. "Get me the board," Marcus said quietly. "Now." Across town, beneath chandeliers and applause, Richard Collier lifted a glass to begin his speech. Richard Collier smiled into the microphone, thanking donors for their continued trust in Blackwood leadership. When his phone began to vibrate against the podium. Once. Twice. A third time, he silenced it without looking. From the edge of the stage, a board member rose abruptly from her table. Her expression had drained of color. She crossed the room quickly, heels striking the marble with sharp, uneven clicks. She leaned toward him and whispered. Collier's smile faltered. "Excuse me," he muttered into the microphone, stepping back. Across the ballroom, the general manager's phone lit up. He listened, nodded once, then turned to security. "Pull surveillance footage immediately," he said, voice clipped. Another whisper reached Collier. "Marcus Hale is on the line." The air shifted. Conversations thinned into silence. Collier stepped behind a velvet curtain near the stage, phone pressed to his ear. No one heard Marcus's voice. They only heard Collier's. "Yes, sir." A pause. "I wasn't aware." Longer pause. "Of course." He glanced toward the lobby doors where Tasha had disappeared minutes earlier. When he stepped back onto the stage, something fundamental had changed. When Collier returned to the podium, the confidence was gone. A thin line of sweat traced his temple despite the cool air. He cleared his throat. "There's been a misunderstanding. An internal review is underway." The words landed flat. Whispers moved through the room, no longer hushed in loyalty, but sharpened by curiosity. A few guests openly checked their phones. The violinist didn't resume. From the rear of the ballroom, the head of security approached the stage, not toward the lobby doors, directly toward Collier. He leaned in, voice low but firm. "The bracelet has been located." Collier blinked. "Located?" "In another guest's clutch. It appears to have been misplaced." A silence followed that felt heavier than the accusation had. Near the bar, the junior manager finally spoke, voice unsteady but audible. "I told you we should check the cameras." No one defended Collier now. Eyes that had watched Tasha with suspicion shifted away from him instead. He stood alone under the chandelier's glare. By morning, the silence would have a different audience. The emergency board meeting began before sunrise. By 8 a.m., transcripts from the gala, security footage, and internal policies were projected across a polished conference table 40 floors above the city. No one spoke casually. Legal counsel did most of the talking. Policy violations were clear. Termination without investigation. Public accusation without verified evidence. Failure to follow surveillance protocol. Each item read into records sounded heavier than the last. Then came the language no corporation takes lightly. Potential racial discrimination liability. Reputational damage. Exposure to civil action. Marcus Hale attended by video, camera off. He asked few questions he didn't need to. The vote to terminate Richard Collier was unanimous. Effective immediately. By noon, a formal apology was drafted and delivered directly to Tasha. Not through HR. Not through an assistant. A board representative met her in person. They offered reinstatement. She declined. They offered a settlement package. She accepted only what her attorney deemed appropriate. By late afternoon, Blackwood Hotels released public statement, clearing her name entirely. The surveillance footage confirmed the bracelet had never been on her cart. The statement ended with a single line attributed to ownership. "Dignity is not optional at Blackwood." Within days, The company announced mandatory bias training for all executive staff, a revised investigative protocol requiring documented review before disciplinary action, and reinforced whistleblower protections allowing employees to bypass direct supervisors. Marcus did not appear in interviews. Industry press moved quickly. Collier's dismissal circulated across hospitality networks by nightfall. Speaking invitations disappeared. Consulting contracts dissolved. Accountability, this time, was written in ink. And weeks later, the lobby looked different. 3 weeks later, Tasha walked through the same revolving doors, but this time no one trailed behind her. The marble floors still gleamed. The chandeliers still shimmered. But the air felt different, quieter, steadier. Blackwood's newly announced Equity and Access Initiative had created a community outreach coordinator role, funded directly from executive bonuses. She accepted after careful thought, not for redemption, for impact. A concierge greeted her by name, properly this time. "Good afternoon, Miss Hale." No cameras flashed, no speeches waited. Just a small gathering in a conference room upstairs where policy revisions would be outlined and implemented. Caleb held her hand again, his steps confident on the polished floor. He looked around. Curious, not afraid, she paused briefly near the spot where her badge had been removed. The memory lingered, but it no longer stung. Restoration didn't need applause, it needed consistency. And sometimes it needed witnesses. Power often shouts. It points fingers. It performs for the room. Authority doesn't have to. That night, one man raised his voice beneath crystal chandeliers. Another never did. And the difference changed everything. But the question lingers longer than the applause ever could. Why do rooms go silent when someone is humiliated in plain sight? Why do capable, educated people suddenly study the floor instead of their own conscience? Would you have spoken up? Or would you have told yourself it wasn't your place? Silence can feel safe in the moment. It can feel neutral. But is it protection or participation? Real power isn't in who you can fire. It's in who you protect when it costs you something. So tell me honestly, what would you have done in that ballroom? And if stories like this remind you that dignity still matters, stay with us for more stories where dignity outlasts ego.